those of you who have come on time. So, just a bit of an introduction. I first met Gerald when I saw this really strange post on the LGBT and KC Facebook group about this protest of a church down on 435 Bannister over their invitation of an anti-LGBT pastor. And it struck me as strange because it was a church protest being organized by a reverend. So, but I went ahead and hopped on that bandwagon as fast and as hard as I could because I personally think that the way we can make the world a better place as soon as possible is to encourage the growth of the best parts and people of religion. And I see within Gerald the embodiment of that, and I'm really proud to have him as a friend. So, he's here to teach us, those of us who may not be Black, Christian, or LGBT, which is me, how we can help fight homophobia in the Black church. So please welcome Reverend Gerald Palmer.
Thank you, Josh. I'm very grateful, for one, that Josh, he called me about the whole protest thing, and I joked that if it wasn't for the atheists, I'd have been at the church by myself with a sign, with 10 or 15 signs. But as he was saying about, making the world a better place, I think it's actually a great idea that we work together. And tonight, really, what I wanted to talk about was homophobia in the Black community, some misconceptions, and how we all can work together. And I'll go into an intro myself and give a little background, but I want to show this video because this video really is a presentation within itself because it highlights all the what happens in the Black community when one comes out as gay or even is assumed to be gay. And the video is called Leviticus Faggot, and it's a song by a bisexual African-American artist. And I'll just go ahead and play this for you guys.
Turn off the lights for you.
Yeah, that'll work. Watch the imagery in the video. So the imagery of this video, what are some of the themes that we saw in the video? Not something you want to start off with, I know, but I think it's very important as we go into this discussion. So yeah, Josh.
It looked like telling the story of a lot of people who are kicked out of their homes when their parents find out that they're gay or transgendered.
Right. Anybody else?
Total rejection of the parents, pretty comparable.
Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, this is not always the case, but a majority, well, I would say majority, but it does happen a lot. When I talk to a lot of my LGBT friends, I see it in the life of my sister, who was a lesbian, and the rejection in the family. And so this is why I want to bring up this story, and not the story, but this topic. To give you a little bit of background of myself, I grew up here in Kansas City, Missouri. This is North Kansas City, but I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. I was born and raised in Kansas City. And I grew up in the Black Baptist tradition, and I spent a little time in the Church of God in Christ. But I remember growing up, and I never really heard the anti-gay sermons in the pulpit at that time. But I was very aware that if you were gay, if you were lesbian, if you was transgender, that was not the way to be. That's what we grew up with. And I remember having a relative that I love dearly. She was born a man, but I knew her as Dee Dee. And I remember as a kid, she was much older than me, but I remember as a kid, I used to go over her house and she used to make cupcakes and and I love to eat. So, she had my heart. and I remember in the early 80s, she passed away. And I had to be like 8 or 9 years old. And I remember going to her funeral and seeing her in her casket dressed as a man. Her mother buried her as a man. And I was so confused because I remember hearing the stories, little whispers about Dee, and I didn't know who David was because all I knew was Dee Dee. And I remember hearing her friends and the sadness and how upset they were. And that was something that stuck in my mind, for a while. And so fast forward some, 20-something years, and in 2005, actually in 2002, I started work as a social worker, and I worked with HIV and AIDS. And I kept seeing how my white clients who were gay, many of them held on to their religious beliefs. Many of them had churches where they felt comfortable and open, and they were welcoming LGBT congregations. But then I would see my black clients who had no open and affirming LGBT churches. And many of them were closeted, and many of them were torn if, how could they be good Christians? How could God love them? Because they were told differently. And so I saw the difference between the difference in the black Christian community and the difference in the white Christian community. And I continue to think that black Christians in the black community were more homophobic than anybody else. And many people I talk to share the same idea. But then I start looking into some things, and actually I want to share some of those thoughts with you. And this is a presentation actually that I'm going to be doing Friday in the Christian community, and so I want to do it tonight for my atheist friends. and basically, the main reason why I want to do this is because I've been asked by many people who are not black, who are not LGBT, how can I help, address homophobia in the black community? And then I hear from my LGBT friends who are black, who talk about the rejection that they face in the black community for being gay, and then the rejection they face in the white community for being black. So there's a double whammy. There's homophobia and heterosexism in the black community, and there's racism that's faced in the LGBT white community and the white community in general. And being a black ally, I kind of see some of that, you know, and some of it is not deliberate, you know, racism. I'll deal with a thing called white privilege, and I also address heterosexual privilege, and how we can become aware of some of the things we do on accident. So, this way, okay. All right. So I talked a little bit about myself and briefly how I got to this point where I'm hobnobbing with atheists and in the gay community. Again, I'm a social worker by education, and I just believe that again, if you want to make the world a better place, we all have to work together. And I don't believe that being gay is a sin. I don't believe in that, and I'll explain a little bit of why. But I just want to get into the idea of why homophobia seems more intense in the black community. And there's some fundamental reasons why it shows itself more impactfully and out front in the black community. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is the black church, because I've used that term and some people were upset with me, because if you say black church, then that's racist. But there are fundamental reasons why we call it the black church. And then we'll talk about the impact of churches and social welfare and on social welfare. What is religious-based homophobia? And we'll go through this list as well. And the main one is going to be how we can break those barriers and find a common ground. So, when I say the term black church, really what I'm talking about is not just one big church where all the black folks go, but it's a systematic, it's a system of different forms of worship styles, different theologies, but it's very diverse. And it's not just about theology. Well, it didn't start off being about theology. And according to Ward, the church is the heart of the Sunday celebration, and historically has been the center of political, social, economic, religious, and educational affairs. Really, any social movement, especially dealing with racism or political movement, has started in the black church. The civil rights movement, the black civil rights movement was housed in the black church. Many of the workers were trained, recruited in the black church. And the reason why there was a so-called black church is because of exclusion. During slavery, the black slaves were given the right to have a religion. It was only religion that was approved by the slave owners. After slavery, many of the former slaves continued to practice the worship and religious beliefs and attended white churches. And although they were free, based on, on paper they were free, they found that they were still segregated in the church, even though slavery was gone. So to feel safe, they created what is now the black church. And the black church was built on hope, and also it was a spiritual escape. Because on Sundays were the day where you can dress up and be treated like somebody. In the workforce, on the street, even if you're a grown man, you were called boy, and your rights were taken away from you. But the same African American man who was called a boy on the street is called pastor in the church or deacon, and that person had great respect. And so And so the church wasn't just a physical place. It was a place to escape the harsh realities of racism. And because of slavery and location, many African Americans were attracted to the Baptist tradition or Methodist tradition. And in fact, the first African American denomination was the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And the early membership in the churches were women. And we see it now that many of our so-called black churches, their memberships are probably 60 to 70% women, but who's in the leadership position? Men. So even though we have a tradition of escaping the isms, sexism is still visible in many of our churches. And so here's a list of some of the major historical denominations in the African American community. You have the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Zion Church, the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, National Baptist Convention of America. Also, you have the USA Incorporated, the National Progressive Baptist Convention, and the Church of God in Christ, which is a Pentecostal denomination. And again, we use the term black church, but as you see here, very, very vast. And this is not, the list. It's just the 7 major ones, because there's still many more, and many more pop up every day. There's also, and I didn't list it here, but there are also African American LGBT denominations as well. There's one called, you slip my mind at. So I got the picture in my head, but I don't have the other name. As we go on to the presentation, I'll have it. Now, there's also African Americans in mainline traditions. Roman Catholic, United Methodist, Episcopal, American Baptist, even Southern Baptist. And Southern Baptist Convention now have a African American president, which 20, 30 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, you would never dream of that, because basically in slavery, fighting the Black Civil Rights Movement, in the lead was the Southern Baptist Convention. And now they have an African American president. Also, we see African Americans in the Christian churches, the Disciples of Christ, UCC, which is the United Church of Christ. And United Church of Christ is very liberal, and they even have some open and affirming, LGBT open and affirming churches as well. Now, the history of the church, again, especially in the black community, the church wasn't, again, it wasn't just all about theology. It wasn't just all about church. But it was about serving the community. Even in Kansas City, there's a history of the black church helping those in their community, because again, many churches, many of those who are, how can I put this? In churches, in certain neighborhoods, not only were they members, but many were also neighbors. So they were very connected. And the reason why many turned to the church for social service help and charity was because many of the agencies that were set up to serve the community did not serve African Americans. And so they turned to the church. Because racism, again, it was a stumbling block to get those services and that help. And so there was a heavy focus on serving the community, because in the Christian community is a belief that you serve others because of worship to God. And so again, one of the issues though, one of the problems was many of these churches only serve those who are members or family members of members. But now, there was a recent poll of Christians, and it stated that 39% of Americans with serious personal problems solicit help from clergy, be it mental illness, bereavement, illnesses, interpersonal marriage issues, issues with children. And many people would, for instance, one of my friends, he's a pastor, and he joked about one of his members felt like she was having a heart attack. And the first person she called was him. And he said, "Why are you calling me?" He call 911 and then call me once you get yourself, once you get in the hospital or whatnot. But many people, the first person they call in crisis is the pastor. And so again, there's still that trust. However, 9 of 10 African Americans see the black church as fulfilling in multiple roles in the community, and they feel like the church has a positive impact of their lives. And in fact, black adults display a high level of religiosity, which is church attendance, prayer, Bible reading. Now, let's think about that. If 9 of 10 African Americans see the church serving in such a big role and such a heavy part of their lives, we must realize the impact of being cast out of that church because of multiple issues, especially if someone comes out as gay. And not even that, if you come out as an ally, it's sort of the same kind of backlash. And I'll talk a little more about this in a minute. All right, so again, we talked a little bit about the history of the black church and social services. Historically, many of the community leaders in the black community were either teachers or pastors. If you look at the history of Kansas City and the black community, you see that many of those who supported the community and fought for social justice were either teachers or pastors, and not just exclusive to Kansas City, but throughout history. Civil rights, social justice policy, mental health services. We've seen a change though, and this has happened because of the mega church movement. And the mega church movement is bigger and better churches, more members, but the pastor is no longer seen as the leader of the community. The pastors are now seen as CEOs. So that's one of the issues that we face. And so I use the term religious-based heterosexism. And what it is, it's when the religious doctrine and teachings that are used to accommodate homophobic and prejudiced behaviors. I believe that many people blame their internal and socially influenced negative feelings about those in the LGBT community. They blame it on the Bible and God. Now, the things that fuel religious-based homophobia in the black community, one of them is a strict belief that the scriptures were written by God. Every word of the Bible you take literally. We ignore the context, we ignore the historical context, but we take everything for face value. They also believe that homosexuality is inconsistent with most religious traditions. The Bible is used as a battle ram, I call it. Battle ram, a bully club, to say how immoral homosexuality is. Also, they cry about it's a threat to traditional family, whatever that is, and it's against God's purpose for mankind, whatever that is. Homophobia, according to Ward, homophobia in the black church is related to authority given to the interpretation of Scripture in these churches. And so you have a couple of views of Scripture. You have some who believe that the Scriptures were written by men who felt inspired by God. Then you have those who believe that the Scriptures were written by God, through men. So everything in the Bible is infallible. There's no mistakes, no issues. But what I found, though, is that this religious-based homophobia and heterosexism is not just exclusive to the African American community. Although the impression we get, from media, especially with Prop 8 in California, the impression was the reason why it didn't pass was because 80% of African Americans voted against it. But the truth is, African Americans in California only make up less than 10% of the population. So how? Yeah, but the perception is that that the black community is more homophobic than anybody else. But having been an ally and having gone toe to toe and word to word with some of the most extreme white evangelicals, I can tell you it's definitely not exclusive to the black community, but there's some elements that make it seem so. One of the things is that in a survey of black Christians, nearly 75% of blacks say that homosexual relations are always wrong. Over 1/3 of African Americans say that AIDS might be God's punishment for immoral sexual behavior. And again, with any kind of surveys, you have to always know how big was the survey size, who did it, what was the reason behind it. But yeah, I believe that the homophobia is real in the black community, but there are some elements to why it's so intense. One of the issues is the historical exploitation of the black community in the form of the rejection of black sexuality. During slavery and even after slavery, black sexuality took a huge hit. There were stereotypes about black sexuality. The mandingo, the black man who wants the white women, or the Jezebel, the black woman who wants the white man. And so the idea of the stereotypes was that the black community were oversexed and had no conscience. Okay. And so in order to prove that the black community was not these things, was not the over-sexualized people, many turned to church. And when I say turn to church, I mean not just on Sundays, Mondays, Tuesday nights, Saturdays, to show that I'm holy. I have Christ. I'm not carrying myself as an over-sexualized person. But what happens is, when you don't talk about certain issues, you repress it. And one of the issues is sexual repression. And that's not just not talking about, homosexuality, but there's no talk in many churches in the black community about sex, period. Anything that deals with sexuality is shunned. And so when you have that hidden, those hidden rules, and I talked about, things with sexuality, you get what you have, the the attacking of those who are different. And so, and another thing too is race survival. We still have that. Many have the perception that that men and women are only here to produce. So if you have a population and in a black community, many people are feeling like, okay, there's not enough children, not enough black men. And so every gay black man is a ineligible man taken away from our community. And so with that belief, that's why you get a lot of the venom, and the fear related to homosexuality. But at times, I used to think that, hey, this is a new phenomenon, this anger towards the gay community. But then I started reading about Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Sr. And in 1939, in his autobiography, he stated, he said, "Why did I preach against homosexuality and all manner of sex perversions? Because as every informed person knows, these sins are on the increase and are threatening to eat the vitals out of America." So we have here Adam Clayton Powell saying a lot of things that many preachers today say. But the difference between Adam Clayton Powell Sr. and what's going on today is that when he spoke about homosexuality, he didn't do it with the venom that we see in the pulpits today. One of the reasons why homophobia is more vicious than it was in 1939 is because of HIV and AIDS. When HIV and AIDS hit on the scene, it was a lot of fear. You have the fear, and so when you have the fear, then you have some of the more angry sermons against homosexuality and beliefs. But the truth is that historically the black church has always had a don't ask, don't tell mentality. I remember, having some flamboyant church members, and the stereotype is that many of them were the musicians, and that was kind of true. Many of the more flamboyant church members were the musicians, and many were gay. And although many in the church knew that person was gay, no one talked about it because that person didn't talk about it. And so again, there was no reason to get in the pulpit and call people sissies and faggots. It was already known that who was gay in the church. But again, it was a don't ask, don't tell mentality, a closeted mentality. And in fact, even though they were noticed, they were often written off as being that away, being funny, sugar in the tank. And as I said before, the shift toward open discrimination began in the 1980s due to HIV and AIDS. In the black community, we saw that, but now there's a bigger presence now because of the influence of the white evangelical community, bringing money in and dollars in. And I don't know if you've seen some of the attacks against President Obama, and a lot of the attacks are from other black leaders, and many of these black leaders are receiving money from white organizations such as the National Organization for Marriage, which is very anti-gay, and a so-called Christian organization who in documents wrote about how to divide the black community and the gay community, and they're doing it. Now, as we look at current practices against the LGBT community, so I've been doing this type of ministry and this type of work for the last probably 6 or 7 years. And I haven't, for the last 6 or 7 years, a day has not gone by that I have not received a Bible verse about homosexuality from somebody. and I say it sadly, but and honestly, I think I haven't, no, a day has not gone by since 2006 where I have not gotten either voicemail or email from someone saying, you're wrong because the Bible says this, But again, all this venom, if you really look closely, there's only at least seven scriptures that people have used against the gay community. Well, 7, 8. Okay, Genesis, the creation story, Adam and Eve, Sodom and Gomorrah, Leviticus, men shouldn't lie with men, and the punishment for doing that, and then 1 Corinthians 6, 9, who would not, it tells you who would not inherit the kingdom of God. Then we have Romans 1:26, 27, which it seems to be the favorite one. And 1 Timothy 1:10, sexual immorality. But the thing about Scripture, and I'm not going to get into the Scriptures or anything like that, is again, I talked about you have those who see it as literal, who every word applies today, no matter that we don't have all the proper translations, of some words. But, so what is the impact of heterosexism in the black community? One of the impact is on masculinity, or what's called hypermasculinity. And again, I'm not the spokesperson for the black community or the LGBT community, but I always hear about how can I help, and I believe it really in order to help. First thing we have to do is learn about the group that they want to help. And so this is just a brief introduction of some of the things that we see. Masculinity influences what it means to be a black man. When I was growing up, the worst thing that you could be called growing up was a sissy or a faggot. If you were called a sissy, those were fighting words. Serious fighting words. And masculinity, it influences the behavior and lives of black males, both straight and gay. Even in the black community, in the black gay community, if you are seen more feminine, that's a bad thing. Because again, you still have the closet is still there. And again, okay, yeah. I'll get to that thought just 1 second. Okay. So, again, the impact of heterosexism on masculinity, again, if you're looked at as gay, gay is a term that many apply to being weak, many apply to being as a white mindset. And so that's why many researchers use the term MSM, men who have sex with men, because many gay men won't identify as being gay, but they will identify as having sex with men. I know it's all about terms. It's all about terms, especially when you have the influence of racism and on sexuality. Another issue too, the impact of heterosexism in the black community, is that it's perceived as contributing to the destruction of the black family. And again, the thought process is that once a man is gay, he can't have any kids. So, it's just that he's on an island, which we know is not true. Another impact of heterosexism, or the cause of heterosexism, if you look at it, is a lack of dialogue regarding sexuality. Again, because of sexual repression, there's very little dialogue about sexuality. I've spoken about sexuality. I've been ridiculed for talking about masturbation. It's not a sin. And people don't like talking about those issues. Another impact of heterosexism is the lack of dialogue and discussion and education regarding HIV and AIDS. And then the impact of heterosexism is the oppression of LGBT individuals. One of the major issues is that, again, that in the black culture, the relationship to the church is very important. And relationship with the family is very important as well. And again, earlier, we talked about how the church was seen very important in the lives of African Americans because you had that safety, from racism and the other isms. But when the person comes out as being gay, those two pillars of self-identity are sometimes fractured. If you come out as openly gay or even as an ally in the black church, you can lose your place in the church, you can lose your membership in the church, and in some families you are turned away. And so that's where the oppression comes in. And so, again, when it comes to needs to be addressed, there's a need for a healthy dialogue in African American churches surrounding sexuality and sexual orientation. The needs of African American and the LGBT community must be met in safe and nurturing environment. One of the issues that we have in Kansas City is that there are many in the black LGBT community who don't feel welcome in organizations and places that were designed for the LGBT community, because they feel like they're not welcome because of racism. And then you're not welcome in the black community or the church, and then you're not welcome in the overall majority LGBT community. And so many people, we think about, okay, if your church or your pastor is constantly hitting you over the head with the Bible and saying how wrong you are, why aren't you leaving your church? How many have said that before? I've said it. Why aren't you leaving this place that obviously doesn't want you? Well, the reason why is because there's still not that feeling of I can go somewhere else and be welcomed and be safe. Although the church and the church tradition has not been welcoming to the LGBT community, it's been the safest place. So our task really is to start looking at how can we make, even groups like this, because there are black atheists, how can we make other places more welcoming? And so racism. There was a study done with African American gay and bisexual men on a predominantly white college campus. And in that study, they found that even though there was LGBT organizations on that campus, many of the students would not use them who were African American because of racism and not feeling welcome. They felt uncomfortable using lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender resources. And we have that here in Kansas City as well. So there was implications including education about sexual orientation within African American campus communities, and LGBT outreach to communities of colors, and continuing institutional support for African American campus organizations are discussed. So in this study, it talked about, okay, we need to have more LGBT resources in the African American community, and then more resources, more LGBT outreach to the African American community. And so one of the things, the questions I ask is, why aren't the LGBT resources trying to reach the African American community? And I've asked that about some of the major, our national organizations like GLAAD and PFLAG. And I've spoken to some of their leaders, and they said the main reason why we don't reach the African American community is not for a lack of trying. We don't know how to. And one of the fears is, again, that the African American community is so homophobic. But I think in order to break those barriers down, we need more education. And giving up and saying we tried is not good enough. It's no longer good enough. One of the issues is the barriers and what barriers to avoid. This is from an open letter to my white, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender sisters and brothers by Diane Finnerty. And she's a white lesbian, and she wrote about some of the things that she saw creating a barrier between the white LGBT community and the black community. And one of the things she talked about was the piggybacking on civil rights struggles of people of color. One of the mistakes I've made is when I say that the gay civil rights movement is the same thing as the black civil rights movement. It's not the same thing, however, oppression is oppression. But I think another issue too is making statements that diminish the impact of racism or imply racial difference. One of the issues I had was a few months ago with the whole a Chick-fil-A thing. There was a big movement to have a kiss-in, same-sex kiss-in. And so I was trying to plead with the organizer, of this kiss-in to probably do something different. And when I brought it up, I was hit with all kind of comments about you should know better because Martin Luther King fought for your rights. Now this is our rights. Why aren't you supporting us? I saw that as I was very uncomfortable because for one, I don't know. It's really it was a classless approach, and it diminished racism. And to tell people, a word like, you should know better because of what your people went through, it does create a barrier. And it also creates a shaming, a way of shaming. And so a practice of mine is not to use words like homophobe. I don't use the word homophobe. I don't use the word heterosexist. Because when you start throwing labels, a person on the outside really won't know who the oppressor is. Because you're throwing negative words and they're throwing negative words. But it's good to start engaging in positive feedback. I plan a tit for tat activist games. I talked about sexual identity to claim it is a badge of legalization. Unchecked beliefs that communities of color are essentially more homophobic than white communities. And understand white privilege and heterosexual privilege. Briefly, I want to address these two here. Again, one of the main reasons why I'm doing this presentation is that I was also under the belief that the black community was more homophobic than any other community. And the danger of that is that you don't want to do anything with addressing the issue because you say, why bother? It's never going to change. But the truth is, it will change. I mean, will it get 100% better and nobody will be homophobic or racist or no? But again, because there's a whole group of folks in the middle. That you have someone like me who is very liberal. I'm not going to change, and then you have someone like Fred Phelps who's on the right side. He's not going to change. But there's a whole group in the middle who are really unsure about what the Bible really says about homosexuality. And they really care about the gay community, but they feel torn about what they were taught. And it's the same thing that happened during adore slavery. You had one group of Christians who supported slavery, and then you had another group of Christians who was against slavery using the Bible. And then you had a group in the middle who said, what if we're wrong about slavery? What if it's not really, something that God wants us to do? If we're wrong about slavery, what else are we wrong about? And you have a group now who feel the same way. If I'm wrong about homosexuality being a sin, what else am I wrong about? And that fear is what's keeping them in the middle. So that's why it's good to start having these discussions and showing, instead of having a back and forth, tit for tat, if we start having these conversations, we just really motivate and move the middle to our side, to the left. And another thing is understanding white privilege and heterosexual privilege. I don't know a lot about white privilege because I don't know if you noticed, I'm not white, but I know a little bit about heterosexual privilege. See, I can walk anywhere. I can hold my wife's hand. I can kiss my wife without folks looking in disgust or asking us to leave the restaurant. I can speak about homophobia all day, every day, but I can decide to have a day where I don't want to discuss it or anything dealing with LGBT. I can do that, but there are some people who can't do that. Just like folks are talking about racism all day, every day, and about black oppression. And then they can go home and not deal with it anymore. Me, I can't take off my skin. So it's really important for us to understand that privilege, that white privilege or that heterosexual privilege. And I learned by, how I say things like my wife. Instead of saying my wife, I say a spouse or my partner. Not to make my LGBT friends feel uneasy at times. So, what is our common ground? We're people.
We're all human.
We're all human. What else? You guys have
the basics we want everywhere. The same thing.
Yeah.
Food,
Food.
family.
Yeah. Be treated with respect.
Treated with respect.
Treated with respect. I believe that you guys, as atheists, have a battle on your hands, just like, you have a battle on your hands to be treated with respect and not to have your rights taken away and stepped on. And so that's a common ground. And hopefully tonight, we got a little bit of understanding of what's really happening. Main thing I want to leave you with was, again, there are many in the black community who won't change, who are not going to change. But then you have others like myself who did change. I wasn't always the atheist-loving, LGBT-loving preacher that I am. But I just realized that in order to make things happen and things change, me personally, of course I do believe in God, but then I also believe there's many ways to God. And I'm quite fine with people who think a little bit, non-traditional, non-traditionally. Are there any questions? Lots of questions.
Yeah. It's just too bad in this day and age that there's still this black-white issue.
The race.
There's so many times in my life I just never saw it. Since a little kid, I've not been that way. And so I see this with black atheists, I see this with other people, that they say that they feel uncomfortable sometimes when they're around right atheists. And I can't understand why. I mean, are we doing something wrong? I mean, am I doing something wrong? Because I try to find out from them, I talk with them, but it doesn't seem to get anywhere sometimes. And this really bothers me.
Yeah. Yet, yeah. It's really hard to answer it at times too, because I understand I understand what you're saying, because again, I think we go into situations feeling uncomfortable, and not just on the black side, the white side as well. But for instance, I had a meeting with the Black Atheist group here in Kansas City, and when I sat down with them, when I sat down with them, I was very uneasy, and they were uneasy as well. And as we talked, we found our common ground. And just like when I met Josh, and I felt a little bit uneasy, but when we're all standing and protesting, mistreatment, we're all connected. Really, the first thing is to have that dialogue, is to have that conversation, and I think really haven't had that conversation on race like we really need to have. Many folks thought that after Obama was elected in 2008, we were a post-race America. Everything was fine and dandy, throwing up daisies and cotton candy, and but the truth is we never had those discussions. And I really think that you guys might need that discussion. Have both sides come together, and how can we start working together?
Well, I think Obama's has greatly bridged some of that gap. I mean, I think it's better.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's just not it's not all there. But I have another group called Midwest Skeptics, and it's very similar to this. And we talked. It's in Johnson County on 87th. And I started talking with you.
Yeah, I would.
You willing? I'd love to have you. I didn't get to hear the beginning of it.
Yeah.
But I'll talk to you afterward.
Yeah.
I would love this. Yeah.
So I'm really fine tuning too, because I'm still working on this. So like, a few versions of this. The one I do for my class, I'll do so I have a human services class, a beginner social work class, and I'll fine tune that as well. Any more questions?
Yeah, you talked about, we need to sit down and have those talks and about race and try to break down those barriers. What's the best way to actually create an environment that, because if you look around, it's heavily white and male here. What can we do differently in our groups and in our events to make an environment that appears to someone who's just seeing it from the outside, welcoming to people who fall outside of the demographic you see represented here?
Right. What you might want to do is bring in, the other group leaders, and have a discussion about how can we make it,
So actually talk to them and find out from them directly. Okay.
What the barrier, because actually it really goes both ways too. Goes both ways, and they have to be willing, willing to. But a lot of times, those in the majority group really have to make the first.
And it's not just the race issue that I'd like to try to open the atheist movement up to, but also to LGBT members. And we've tried. And I guess insofar that we have talked to people we know in the movement and sent emails to their organizations, and we'll either get, oh, sure, I'll promote your event and I'll come, like we're going to do tonight, or we don't get any response to the emails at all. I mean, of course, I can't go show you the exact details of and wording that we use when we talk to them, but is there something you would recommend that we could do to go beyond just emailing them and talking to them? Because apparently that's not enough from our end.
And see, I really don't know if there's some LGBT groups or atheist groups already. Or,
well, and it's not just LGBT atheist group, just LGBT groups in general, GLSEN,
Yeah.
PFLAG-KC, Equal. We've tried to reach out to these organizations, and it's just this wall of silence. We've had some people say it's because they're working with faith groups who
That's true.
would raise objections if they found out that these groups were
Right.
working with atheists. In your opinion, is that the biggest contributor, or is there
That's the
something in
major
our
issue,
approach that we're
yeah.
doing wrong?
That's the major issue, because you have many, of these groups who are really trying to get into the faith-based organizations, so they can address the bullying and all that, and to, have conversations with the atheist organization may seem like
All right.
it could be a barrier.
Would you say maybe a good strategy might be for us to start, I don't want to use the word, but aggressively pursuing their events, find out when they are, and then we just go to their events, show up and show them that atheists do care about their movement, even if they don't reciprocate?
Yeah. It's kind of funny too, being asked these questions as a Christian, helping you guys to get the numbers.
We're not trying to turn anyone into an atheist. We just want to work with these groups to
That
help.
you care. Just show up. I mean, just,
Okay.
get to their events and, show your, I would do that.
There's an event in Topeka once a year that's the Million Fag March. Have you heard of that?
No.
Oh, really?
Group.
It's
So it started, 5 years ago?
five
Yeah,
years ago.
five years ago or so. Something like 100 people showed up then,
Mhm.
and over this period of time, they probably have 500 people show up maybe. And when we first year started going, there were some Topeka atheists there that we've been friends with for quite some time. And some people, I couldn't get very many people from here to come to go there, but we got quite a few from Topeka. And it was amazing, the first year, they would go around the square and we'd get the finger and they'd honk the horn and tell us faggot lovers and this and that, But the second, the third, and the fourth, it just got to nothing. It got total support. And people, you knew it was grandparents with grandkids, honking the horn upside, so good for you. So see, just in that 5-year period, how much
Things have
the
changed.
people that were just going around, how much it changed. It makes a difference, it's huge. And I agree with, that maybe that's what we are to, if you do something, I'll just put it out to skeptics too, and just try to make it bigger.
I'll show your face, really. You don't have to, really. Like right now, there's a movement of Christians who are welcoming. We're now going to some LGBT events with T-shirts saying, "I'm sorry," or "We apologize," or just being there, showing the presence, and do that.
Yeah. Kind of going back to it, one of the problems that we find in trying to attend these LGBT events is that we find out about them maybe a day or two in advance, and it's really hard to get people organized and going with such short notice. Is there a good place you would recommend for us to, a mailing list we can subscribe to, or a site to check periodically that would, at which they publish these events, or is it just kind of there really isn't anything that you know of that is a good thing to subscribe to find out, kind of like a week or two in advance of these events?
One good source is I can't get the word, a Camp magazine.
How's that spelled?
Camp.
Camp,
Camp Magazine.
CAMP,
Okay, Camp Magazine.
which is Kansas City's premier LGBT magazine, and they keep up with all the dates.
So is that like something they send you in the mail, or can you sign up for an email and they
You
send
can
you?
get it. You can get it.
free.
Yeah,
You pitch.
yeah.
Okay.
You might also want to have a conversation with their publisher, John Long. I can send you his information.
I'd love that, yeah.
Yeah, have a conversation with him about LGBT atheism.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You probably talked about this or did, and I missed it, but how long have you been active in this?
I've been openly active for about 6 years. It started off with I started off with a radio show. Actually,
Local?
yeah, actually with a local radio show.
Did he talk about this and you got it on tape?
The radio show?
Yeah.
No.
And then,
Okay.
Okay, actually, I started with a radio show, and the radio show was on a local Kansas City radio, a gospel station, urban gospel station, and we addressed HIV and AIDS in the black community and the black church. A year into the program, I started doing research on homophobia and how it impacted HIV. And so I had an executive decision as a producer and host of the show to start addressing homophobia in the black church. And so one of the things, we got a little bit of extra money, and I was able to get a billboard. And this one was on 42nd and Truce. And it said the church has AIDS, and then on the bottom it gave the time and day of the radio show in the station. And basically it was a slogan that really says that if one person is impacted or affected by HIV and AIDS, then we all are. We have to look at it as a call to compassion and love. And so that a billboard we got attention from the Kansas City Star, and they did a little story on the book. On that, and a couple years later, I wrote a book, and I have a few copies of The Church Has AIDS, and the book details the radio show that we were on for 3 years. And on that show, we had members from GLAAD. We interviewed GLAAD, we interviewed PFLAG, we interviewed a lot of gay activists. And this was really, if you think about it, this is a black gospel station, a black gospel Christian talk show, interviewing members of the gay community. And it was really a hectic time. We lost different sponsors. I really love that show because it gave me the opportunity to impact people, to really get into the homes and minds of folks to hopefully do things a little bit differently.
You lost your show because of that?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Wow.
It's a loss of funding, and the general manager of the station said, you can keep the show, we'll do it for free because you're talking about HIV, but none of the gay stuff. And I said, well, I can't really talk about HIV without talking about homophobia. It impacts it. And not even just because someone's gay, it just, that disease, the stigma, is attached with homosexuality, and nobody wants to do anything or help because of that stigma. And so we addressed, we talked to many national experts, and we did a lot of groundbreaking things. In fact, one of my friends, he's a gospel artist. He's a national, at the time he was a national recording artist. And he was gay. I knew he was gay. He told me a while back, but I was interviewing him about homophobia in the gospel industry. And on the show, he came out. He came out publicly.
Wow.
And I was just so shocked, and he was shocked. He said he just couldn't deal with it. But after he did that, a few of his concerts were canceled. He had things all lined up, and they were canceled, and he left the gospel industry, but now he's back. He's back recording again, but just things like that. So yeah, I've been doing this for 6 years, but yeah.
People need to know this.
Yeah, it's not from a lack of trying. It's not, believe me, it's not from. I've got a lot of support. Facebook's been really good. I've got a lot of support from Kansas City Star. I've been in there a few times with my letters to the editors. Camp Magazine's been really good to me too. And I've been on a few things nationally. A few weeks ago, I was in the Philly Tribune, which is the nation's oldest African American newspaper. I did an article on me a couple weeks ago.
Have you been on KCR here locally?
I have not, and again, not from a lack of trying.
I got lucky, and I don't know, do you know?
The KCUR?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're supposed to have we're having an interview for the conference we just had this past
Oh,
weekend,
good.
play tomorrow at
Good.
10 a.m.
Yeah, I got invited, and so
Yeah.
it'll be.
Is it Casey Currents? Or
It's gonna be about the groups here, but it's gonna be Darrell Ray, Sarah Hargraves and me,
Oh, cool.
10 o'clock to 11 o'clock. But, you know, if I get an opportunity to talk to them, I might mention you.
Oh,
You know,
cool.
but
I
I
appreciate
think
it.
they'd probably be interested. in
Yeah,
what we're doing.
I've really, to be honest with you, there was a time when I was constantly, you know, sending out press releases and, you know, doing all kind of, you know, relation stuff and, you know, and self-promotion. But I've, you know, having a family and, you know, working and doing all that,
Sure.
I've kind of just, I backed out a little bit and things have been happening, you know, by themselves. So, yeah.
Yeah, life.
Life was like that. Life was like that.
But, yeah, I'll talk to you about.
Okay.
Come and talk about the schedule. Maybe include some of this stuff too.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yes, sir.
It seems like you're calling yourself not really aligned with the conservative Christian movement. You mentioned that the 7 big black
Yeah,
foundations
yeah.
are still pretty
Yeah.
anti-homosexual. So I'm wondering, do you not have a door open to you then as a voice in that community? Do they look at you as like, he's not a real Christian?
Yeah, yeah, and that's true. So that's why I'm here, because and you know, the door's open. No, but seriously, yeah.
Because I know that mentality, having been most of my life in Christianity.
Right.
So, you know, I come from, where
Mhm.
most people are Christians to us, because we were the only true Christians.
Right. Yeah. And within that, within those 7 major organizations, especially the Church of God in Christ, the door is closed. However, again, those with that, you know, conservative, hard right, you know, mindset, we're never going to reach them. You know, that they're so close now. But there's a whole middle that I'm, you know, definitely getting, and I'm getting because of the whole compassion issue. You know, I really, it's been a struggle, but I really, I do everything in my power not to respond back with the negativity and the, you know, the negative words. I try to model my behavior after, you know, what I was talking about Jesus. You know, I try to carry myself, you know, the way that I want to be treated, and I treat others that way. But though, most of those who, in those, 7 denominations, I have family members in most of those. And being a preacher, I used to go preach at the churches, and I have been invited, you know, back, you know, to many of those places. But there are other doors that have been opened as well. Yes, sir.
You know, you mentioned earlier that, you know, a lot of people blame the black church in California for being the reason why Prop 8 passed, but that, you know, black people only make up 10% of the population in the state. And I think it's very easy to turn that on the person who makes that accusation. That, you know, let's assume all that 10% can vote. If 80% of the voting black population voted for Prop 8, that means 8% of the state population was key to passing a piece of legislation. And the problem there isn't that 80% of black people voted for it. It's the fact that voter turnout was so low that 8% of the state population can dictate what legislation passes in the state. So I think it's very easy to turn on the person and say, the problem isn't the black churches that voted for it, it's the fact that everyone else stayed home and
That's
didn't
true,
actually
too.
vote to keep
Yeah.
the legislation out.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And again, too, is, I mean, if you also look at the money that was spent.
Oh, yeah, the Mormon
and where
church.
the money came from, you know, why not to talk about that, you know?
Yeah. That gets into the whole issue of like the Pulpit Freedom Sunday just yesterday.
Oh, yeah, that's a mess. Yeah.
So how do you get people to vote more? I mean, over 50% of the population in America doesn't vote.
It's, that's a whole another talk on its own.
Right.
Kind of keep
way beyond me, right?
Yeah.
But it used to be thought that was unintelligent.
Oh, I know.
Portion, it's not, it's the more intelligent people that are outvoted.
Yeah.
Very weird.
Anything else?
So you don't have the congregation for yourself anymore?
Actually, no, well, it's kind of funny because, you know, I'm still called pastor.
Mhm.
Because I have like a cyber following. And, you know, Facebook has been a, real help, because I have a lot of, I have a lot of folks who will, ask for prayer or follow or support me.
Mhm.
But I did find a great church. I'm at Crossroads Church. And Josh been there, he visited one, a Crossroads Church. It's a non-denominational, it's open and affirming. But it's also majority white, and we're trying to change that. Our family is the only black family there, but I'm trying to get, more, folks of color to come out. I don't actually have a physical church, but I it's still called pastor for some odd reason.
So you preach at the Crossroads Church?
Yeah.
In the Crossroads downtown?
No, we're actually on 79th and Main.
So it's the opposite of cross.
Yeah, 79th and Main. But I've been, a funny thing is I've been preaching more this year than I preached all 7, 8 years I've been an actual preacher. Because, as an associate pastor at a traditional black church, you don't preach a lot. You do a lot of leadership work, but you don't preach a lot. But this last year, I've been preaching at all different type of churches and places.
So is this how you make your living?
No, actually, no, I don't make anything.
Oh, you don't?
I don't get it. No, I don't. Actually, no. So I'm actually a advisor, academic advisor at Penn Valley.
Chemical?
No, academic advisor,
Oh, sure.
and I'm also a part-time instructor with the Human Services Program. So that's how, I make the gas money. But preaching and doing this kind of stuff, I do it because, love and desire to help.
Important.
Yeah.
Why Josh and I do these groups.
I know, again, you gotta have the love for it.
Well, I wanted to mention, and thought it was important how you focus on the idea that and I don't even know if there's any definitive analysis of whether the black community is more homophobic than the general population. I would say, depending on what the church attendance is in the black community compared to the white community, it may be no difference if you went across the church attending population, say, it's just because more people go to more often go to the same type of churches in that community.
Right.
So I think it's important to, was struck by what you said about not giving up just because of the idea that people think, that it's impossible because of this overwhelming idea that black people are more homophobic. But I'm also curious about when you talked with the Black Atheist group, would you, you mentioned that you guys were uneasy. As atheists, not all atheists think that we should make community with church people, even if they are both, even if we're all interested in social justice, because there's a lot of emotion around people who have had to leave their religion, and so sometimes that kind of people just think, I don't want to talk about religion at all. I just want to so they might be hostile to you because not necessarily because you're black, but because you're involved in religion. But were you able to bridge the issue with the black atheist, and what would you say was the same kind of issue as far as being wary of one another?
Right. We bridged that gap, by having to understand a common ground. What's the common ground? And with that group, the common ground was addressing homophobia and other social justice issues. So I'm a big believer on finding that common ground.
Right.
You know, what can bring us together. That's why I asked that question, you know, what's the common ground, you know? With that group, our common ground was we were African Americans, and how can we work, you know, how can we find our, you know, our similar. But I do understand the hostility, you know, the uneasiness, especially if someone is is LGBT, and you know you've been told all these negative things about who you are, or if you're atheist, you've been told all these negative things, and here comes this guy, you know, with Reverend in front of his name, you know, and although he might say something a little bit different, he still represents that pain, and I do understand that, and so the meeting with the black atheists, I just let them ask a bunch of questions about the problems in the Bible, and and they asked me questions about do I believe that atheists are good, that you can be nice, but are you still going to hell?
Right.
And I said no, I don't believe that, and they're like, what? And because I don't believe in hell, so so it was a trick answer. And again, I found that however no matter who we are, we have our own belief systems, or non-belief systems. And if we can get around that and just get to what our common grounds are, what we desire, and we can eliminate those barriers and that uneasiness.
Well, from a personal point of view, I was disappointed I wasn't able to attend with Joshua for your protest.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter is a lesbian, and she moved to Boston, Massachusetts, so that her and her partner could get married.
Oh, wow.
And to get away from the prejudice that
Mm-hmm.
they experience here in Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes on all over the place. It's not just isolated
Right.
case. I mean, the more and more the more conservative, socially conservative, politically conservative states are making life miserable
Right.
for
Yeah.
all the LGBT community, whether black or white or whatever their race is.
Right.
So I applaud you for, being a Christian but understanding, basically to me, being closer to what Jesus' message was.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, you're a humanist, that's what I see here.
Right.
You don't say that too loud.
That's what we would call
Well,
You
we
don't say-
want to thank you.
You don't say it too well.
Quiet.
I call myself a free-thinking humanist Christian. So, and this has been something that I've evolved into the last 2 years, because I was at a traditional black church, a Baptist church, and on my Facebook I wrote that I believe in marriage equality. At the time I was associate pastor, and word got out that Gerald believed in and actually I've been saying the same thing for years, but I friended somebody who didn't know.
Yeah.
And so it got
And
out.
you put it in print too.
Yeah, which I didn't really care. I'm a pastor, I already knew that I supported the LGBT community, and so he just created a big thing, and long story short, I'm at a new church.
Yeah.
I personally can't really worship at churches that are non-affirming. There's something in me that I can't even walk into the door. I can't, not yet. Maybe later I'll have it, the ability to, but now I can't. But yeah, so I'm a free-thinking humanist Christian, and those are curse words, and in some avenues. But yeah. So I've been called a humanist. Good, cool. Yeah. Actually, really the high point of all this was last month I preached at All Souls.
Oh, okay.
I preached at All Souls. Yeah, and it was funny because when I was growing up, I had a friend who attended. His family attended All Souls. I think I was 12, and I went to church with them one Sunday, and I told my mom I wanted to go back, and she told our pastor, And he was like, no, you can't let him go there, because, turn to atheist, or, or the devil and all this and that. And so I called my mom last month. I said, hey, Mom, I'm preaching at all souls. And which is funny, because again, we all evolve, and again, the common thing, I felt there was the call for social justice. And I see it here with you guys as well. So that, I thank you guys for inviting me here,
Oh, thank you.
for listening to
Thank
me.
you for coming to speak.
It's
Very
interesting. Right, right.
At the risk of being in the lion's den.
I know. I'm used to being in the lion's den. I'm a free-thinking humanist Christian.
Well, we have quite a few Christians actually in our group, so we have one of our
Oh,
groups,
bet.
provocateurs,
Mhm.
peacemakers, which is ran by a Christian.
Peacemaker.
Friend of mine.
Yeah,
That's
okay,
a good
cool.
word. And
Great.
so, meets 2 Fridays a month. And so
Okay.
maybe that.
Yeah.
Talk to us sometime.
Okay. Wouldn't mind.
Yeah. Fantastic. Is anyone going to have a drink or anything? Too late? Not tonight, man.
Laundry in the machine.
Oh, I will go, but,
Huh?
Okay.
Josh,
Well, so-
Now, I do have books. They're $10 a piece, so you might want a book. If not, you can also find the book online at, it's a little more expensive online, because self-published, you know how that is. And, you can find them on Amazon. The name of the book is The Church Has AIDS, Essays on Sexuality, Sexual Orientation. I'll show you what it looks
Yeah,
like.
the book.
she showed.
Yeah, I'll show you what it looks like. It's a non-traditional book for a non-traditional person. It looks just like this, and it's really $10, $20, because I was at a conference a couple years ago. You gotta go up, then you go right down.
so is that the atheist discount?
Yeah. No.
$10. Okay.
Definitely you're in the room.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.
I'm not here.
No problem.